Story 1. They don't teach that in school. Note: this is a rant about Japanese schools but also applies to American ones as far as I can tell. This is something people talk about all the time and are almost always wrong about for very simple political reasons. Yes, they did, you just did not pay attention. Totally depends on where you go to school because school boards are all different. Yes, they do, and people saying otherwise are using it as a sometimes racist dog whistle. This kind of ties into the idea that the Japanese government has never apologized. Yes, they have, and a quick search will show you this. Is it a genuine apology? Often not. Is the Japanese government consistent? Often not. But this is also part of the issue. You can find someone in almost any democratic system who says something stupid to support your narrative. Story 2. I keep seeing people misunderstand the term censorship, either insisting that it is not censorship for a private company to remove certain speech, or calling people hypocrites for being against government censorship while accepting corporate censorship. Firstly, censorship is the act of examining content to remove what the censor considers objectionable material from public view. This includes both the government banning certain speech from being shown on television and a television company deciding on its own not to show certain content. Both are, by definition, forms of censorship. Secondly, in the United States, the First Amendment to the Constitution states that Congress is not allowed to make laws that restrict your freedom of speech. The First Amendment only protects you from government censorship. A private corporation having rules about what content they allow on their platform does not infringe on your legal right to free speech, but the government making certain speech illegal would infringe on your constitutional rights. In summary, both government and corporate censorship are forms of censorship, but only government censorship is against the Constitution. Story 3. Withholding your vote has the opposite impact of what you want. Politicians want to get elected and then re-elected primarily above almost anything else. If the margin is small, they will avoid taking risks and are more likely to move to the other side to gain more votes next time. If the margin is larger, they will take more risks. Story 4. Just the economy in general. The narrative that President Biden is failing the economy really hurt him, but it was not accurate. The president has very little influence over the economy. The most hands-on action they can take is implementing tariffs. Also, people often mistakenly think our national debt works like credit card debt. I feel like there are some videos by Ray Dalio that help explain this well. One of these videos was a revelation to me. Story 5. Capitalism and socialism. People use the terms to mean things I do not like and things the government does, but they have much deeper meanings and implications that people do not even think about. Story 6. Education should not be a political issue, but somehow it is. The number of times you hear, "I do not want this taught to my child," or "I want you to teach this alternative fact instead of the real information," is concerning. No, you teach the facts. If the facts make a group, person, or place look bad, then hopefully they learn from that situation so it is not repeated. Education should be about information the same way news should be about information. No spin, no narrative, no hidden agenda. Just information. Sadly, we will not be going back to that anytime soon. Story 7. Taxation is not about paying more or less, but about ensuring it is spent wisely and efficiently on necessary public services. Story 8. I think many Americans do not know our history well enough, nor understand the evolution of the political parties. First, the United States of America is both a republic and a representative democracy. They are not mutually exclusive or opposed systems. I heard that a lot during the last election. Second, the Democratic-Republican Party founded by Thomas Jefferson was the precursor to the Republican Party of today, as opposed to the Federalists of Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton favored a strong central government, central banking, and northern industrialism. Jefferson's southern states' rights and agrarian Democratic Republicans eventually split into two factions by 1824. The National Republicans, led by Northern John Quincy Adams, and the Democratic Party in the South, led by Andrew Jackson, setting the stage for the Civil War. Third, the Republicans of Abraham Lincoln's day were founded on the abolition of slavery and became today's modern Democrats, and vice versa. The Democratic Party began to realign in the 1932 New Deal election of Franklin D. Roosevelt that set the stage for the 1948 election with three parties: Truman, Democrat, Dewey, Republican, and Thurmond, Dixiecrat. This election firmly flipped the Democratic and Republican parties' political and regional alignments to those of today. Following the election, Southern Democrats who had turned Dixiecrat folded into the Republican Party, while Northern Democrats coalesced, leading to the parties we have today. Strom Thurmond's political history is instructive. Fourth, the American Civil War was fought over the Southern states' right, specifically to maintain chattel slavery. The Southern heritage of the Confederate flag is associated with supporting slavery for the economic benefit of their plantation system. The Civil War came as a result of Republican Abraham Lincoln's 1860 election promise to abolish slavery. Story 9. Most elections are won by screaming about big scary things that have very little impact on society to make you ignore the much bigger issues affecting you in the background. So, next time you think abortion is bad, must vote for the Republican Party, or guns are bad, must vote for the Democratic Party. Consider doing a little more research. Story 10. Many people criticize single-payer universal healthcare by asking, how will we pay for it? In reality, the United States' current system costs significantly more, and switching could potentially save a lot of money. Story 11. Locally, Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States Security Partnership is often discussed as a submarine program. The submarine program is only part of it. It is Pillar 1, and I am not in the mood to talk about that. Pillar 2 includes hypersonic and counter-hypersonic weapons, next-generation undersea warfare and detection technologies, quantum technologies, and cyber warfare development. This is seriously important work. It is so expensive that it is causing concern in the United States, which is why collaborating on the costly research and development and coordinating acquisitions is a good idea. None of that matters, though. Everyone only cares about endless discussions about the submarines. Story 12. I'm American, so I'm coming from that perspective. Executive orders. They are not laws. They only address specific departments or agencies within the executive branch and must be within the bounds of current laws. A president cannot simply sign a new tax law into code. Taxes. The federal government is very limited in taxation. A wealth tax is unconstitutional. It took an amendment just to tax income. The federal government can only tax through sales or tariffs and now income. Any other direct tax must be apportioned, meaning each state would be responsible for paying the federal government a specific amount per person. Story 13. Income inequality exists largely because many people in America consider themselves middle class, even though more than half qualify for public support. The concept is often simplified to mean mid-level income, rather than referring to degreed professionals and business owners, which more accurately defines the middle class. Story 14. I am pretty involved in politics, and because of that, it is a common subject I discuss with people. I was surprised at work to find out how little people understood the difference between Congress, the federal legislature, and our state legislatures. There were multiple people who did not understand that each state has its own government and assumed Congress made most laws and decisions. These are all grown adults, by the way. Summary: the basic levels of United States government, including and especially state government. Story 15. States' rights and federalism. It is interesting to hear people discuss California seceding from the United States without recognizing the irony. Story 16. Almost literally all of them, because most people do not actually care about understanding what is real. They would greatly prefer to have their preconceived biases and prejudices confirmed. If I had to narrow it down to one, I feel this is most evident in how Americans, in particular, view other nations. None of them know much about China, but they know to hate it. Story 17. Just anything with the military. Kill-to-death ratio does not determine who wins a war. Every military will avoid the draft if necessary because it comes with strategic problems as well as political ones. The United States of America will use reserve activation before they implement a draft. Every country lies about its own military capabilities. Guerrilla warfare is nowhere near as effective as people believe. The army with larger numbers and better technology can still be defeated by terrible leadership and plain bad luck. A general can be amazing, but he will still be subordinate to civilian leaders. Logistics is important. Story 18. Everyone who must work for a living is in the working class. It is in capital's interest to divide us into different classes. Story 19. Guns are about freedom and liberty. Legislation leads to confiscation. Economically, it is about getting crates of rifles to straw purchasers to arm cartels or whoever has money for them. The death penalty is about justice and deterrence. It involves charging the taxpayer to turn one trial into two trials, an appeal, a special jail unit to house inmates, and legal clients who are literally fighting for their lives and have nothing better to do than try again to get off death row. Hundreds of millions of dollars go to lawyers over laws written by lawyers, which would have better prevented murders if spent on school lunch programs. Story 20. People misunderstand that politicians do not actually fix problems. They just schedule more meetings about them. Story 21. When people talk about socialism, the response is usually from those who think they are advocating for the complete destruction of the entire government immediately, followed by an attempt to rebuild something completely different from the ashes, leaving the masses ungoverned for a time. What most socialists want is to shift society gradually, keeping an eye on the outcomes of their changes and adjusting as needed. Destroying everything is the opposite of helping. Edit. So far, people seem to think that absolute immediate Marxism is what I mean when I directly call that out as a problem. Again, what I am calling for is a measured move into a few socialist policies with checks to ensure things go well. Story 22. Why stock ownership is not taxed like property ownership. Owning stock means owning part of a business. The business pays property taxes on relevant assets to federal, state, and local authorities as needed. As a result, stock owners have already indirectly paid those taxes in the form of reduced dividends and slower growth. Taxing the stock again as property would be duplicative. Story 23. A bit controversial, but I don't think most people understand how many problems closed borders create and how successful open borders can be. The history of a closed border with Mexico is a little complicated because there were phases where immigration was restricted or checkpoints were established for various reasons, generally unfounded xenophobia. However, the current version of the closed border that tightly restricts migration is less than half a century old. Before that, there was a lot of temporary migrant agricultural labor from Mexico, and people would freely travel back and forth for work and mostly settle back in Mexico. People usually prefer to stay in their home countries with their extended families if they have the choice. If you close the border and make it impossible to visit home, people get locked in, not out. The border was closed more due to prejudices than any concrete, widespread issue. The unintended consequence was the creation of a robust illegal trafficking industry and the strengthening of cartels, and therefore, crime. Open borders in the European Union have not led to a massive influx of immigrants from poorer countries into wealthy ones. For the most part, it has strengthened the economies and cultural cohesion of Europe. The United States is effectively also a system of open borders. The history and the data do not support the idea that closing borders without an extremely good reason ever leads to more safety or prosperity for anyone. However, people are so convinced of the validity of their own unfounded biases that they think an open border policy would be an insanely radical idea. Just open the border and let people travel in and out. This would eliminate a major source of income for the cartels and give people the ability to provide much-needed labor and then go home if they want to. Story 24. Support for state censorship is rampant on both the left and right, but by most metrics, support is higher on the right. This is quantifiable by, for example, the Libertarian Cato Institute's extremely in-depth, comparative 2017 study on support for state censorship of many different viewpoints and forms of expression among Republicans, Democrats, liberals, and conservatives. Most people think support for state censorship is much higher on the left than the right. This misunderstanding is caused partly by an implicit assumption in much of our discourse that free speech protections exist primarily for right-wingers, and that the left has an affirmative duty to continuously defend free speech for the right against censorship efforts by left-wingers, but the right has no reciprocal duty to defend free speech for the left against censorship efforts by right-wingers. We see this exemplified, for example, in how the American Civil Liberties Union has repeatedly expended large amounts of energy and resources defending free speech for the right and been harshly criticized for not giving every such case top priority with the finite money and time they have. On the other hand, seemingly no one I ask can point to a right-wing organization, as opposed to a hardline libertarian group like the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, which devotes comparable resources to defending left-wing free speech against censorship efforts on the right. After asking people to name one, I sometimes ask them to imagine what would happen if you went to a Federalist Society meeting and told them their principles required them to give top priority to real, well-documented cases involving public school students in Texas and Florida forced by state law to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance unless they get parental permission to opt out. My guess is you would see many Federalist Society members rolling on the floor laughing before being shown the door. Story 25. All of them. People overall are foolish and are trying to argue political positions with nothing more than a headline understanding of the issue. Story 26. They have the right idea while knowing nothing about the subject, whatever it may be, in which they lack personal expertise. All political discourse is now like junk food, scientifically engineered to be hyperpalatable and to outcompete anything with substance. It is like consuming Doritos and Mountain Dew for every meal. Therefore, topics you do not understand are filled with empty feelings about good versus evil, moral versus immoral. You are starved for nutritious information and only see more Doritos and Mountain Dew everywhere. As a result, we all misunderstand nearly everything filling the news cycle. Story 27. How a lack of public health care affects your wallet. Why is that Ford so expensive? Because you are paying for health care in the window sticker. Story 28. Tariffs are taxes on imports. Consumers pay them through higher prices. Story 29. People who think freedom of speech is for me and not for you, and those who think it applies everywhere, even in private businesses. Story 30. I think most people's political views are pretty unexamined. You just fall in line with the left or the right and turn the other side into cartoon villains. So every single one is my answer. Story 31. In the United States, all of them. Why? Because we have been purposefully kept uneducated, miseducated, uninformed, and misinformed so that we are more easily manipulated into voting against our own interests to further enrich and empower the ruling class. Can you imagine if the media, including social media and pundits, broke down each policy and process into simple layman's terms, gave us a genuine, realistic prediction about how each proposed legislation would actually affect the average person's daily life and well-being, and reported accurately which politicians were being paid by which special interests or owned investments that would earn them profits based on how they voted? That is what freedom of the press was supposed to do. It was supposed to let people know what was really going on. But now most of the press is owned and controlled by political parties, so all we hear is what they want us to hear. Story 32. In Canada, a large percentage of the population does not have a clear understanding of immigration. They just notice more people of color and cannot find good jobs. They think that it is a leftist agenda. They are being invaded. One positive outcome of Donald Trump being elected was that it discouraged many people from supporting the Make America Great Again movement. We were very close to severe societal collapse. Story 33. I understand that this is a polarizing topic. However, many people misunderstand trickle-down economics because it was misrepresented by former President Barack Obama. Story 34. Citizens United. Many people believe that it allows companies to donate unlimited money to candidates. However, it states that people retain their right to freedom of speech when they pool their money. Therefore, they are allowed to make independent expenditures to express support or objection to a candidate. Story 35. I do not think Democrats understand that $15 per hour is not a living wage. I do not think Democrats understand that Medicaid is not even nearly good enough and excludes hundreds of millions of people from access to health care. I do not think Democrats understand that voting is a right and people want their vote to be free to cast and count once it has been submitted. I do not think Democrats understand that they are not owed anything and they have to offer people policies like these if they want them to vote. I do not think Democrats understand that people do not vote because their policies are not beneficial enough to support, not because they are uneducated, racist, or misogynistic. I do not think Democrats understand that they have to earn a win to win. Story 36. The United States has been disrupting Muslim and oil-producing countries since the 1960s. Their hatred of us is justified. Israel controls us. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.